Welcome back to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Pearson from Janesville PD in Wisconsin, 28 years total in law enforcement. Welcome to the show, Chief Pearson. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited about this. Thank you.
I am too. I have a feeling that we could probably talk for like 2, 3 hours just based on our previous conversation. So I'm excited to hop in, but I'm curious to know a little bit about your background. What was your upbringing like? I know that you come from a law enforcement background, yes?
Yeah, it's kind of in the bloodline. I'm a third generation police officer. My grandfather was an officer throughout most of northern Illinois and a police chief in a small community in the northern region. And then my dad actually retired after 20 years in law enforcement as a detective from my hometown. And my mom, also in the same county I lived in, with both my parents, was a radio dispatcher for 43 years before she retired. So
Wow.
I literally grew up in a law enforcement agency for the most part. Like, as in, when I was younger, I used to play in the common area of the police department, waiting for my mom to get off before I could go home with her. So I'd be taken from school to the police department and wait there, and then we'd go home afterwards. So yeah, been around for a long time.
Did you, growing up in that environment, just always know that that was the path for you too? Or when did that happen? Because it kind of goes either way. You either have, kids of law enforcement that are like, nope, I'm going to go a completely different direction. And other kids that are like, yes, I knew like from day one that this is what I wanted to do too.
I guess I have a little bit of almost two answers for that question. No, that was not my path. In my mind, it was not my path. But I think in my heart, it really was my path because my dad was ultimately my like real life superhero. And I know this sounds a little bit cliche, probably childish in some ways, but I just remember seeing him in his uniform and he'd come in, and this is back in the 80s where that leather squeaked and it squeaked loud, and he'd walk into a room. He's a large man, a very, very large man. And you'd hear the squeaking of his leather belt as he walked, and then the like the jingling of his keychain and stuff. And I just thought, man, this guy could just take on the world and win. I guarantee it. And it was like I was the coolest kid in the whole neighborhood because, like, not only was he a police officer, but he's just this big, massive dude that most people, when they looked at him, were a little bit intimidated by him. But the best quality that he had was his ability to talk to people. Because by the end of the conversation, you might have started off a little afraid or intimidated, but by the end of the conversation, you respect him significantly.
Yeah. Was there anything specific that you learned from either one of your parents that you did take with you when you entered into this career?
Yeah, I mean, tons of things. I mean, we probably don't even have enough time on this podcast to go through all of it. But I think the biggest part of it is that that drive to want to help others. I mean, it really was instilled at an early age. Um, I mean, granted, I was your typical kid growing up. I was very active, involved in a lot of sports. Um, but man, I didn't like bullying, man. Some I'd have some of my, you know, friends of mine that would get bullied, and I was generally the one that would step in the middle of it to try to separate it. And trying to model some of the things that I felt like my dad would do at the time would try to, now the word is de-escalate the matter. At the time, it was more like de-argue the problem away. But I would just intervene, and I just didn't like people picking on others, and I felt like everybody should be treated fairly, and you should feel safe all the time. It just was always ingrained in me. But my dad taught me kind of the, be stern, be hard, be direct kind of approach to life. But my mom showed me these softer, more finer details on how to, be fair and reasonable and listen sometimes before you speak. I think those are the biggest things that I can say in summary of like my whole childhood with both my parents in that capacity.
Thank you for sharing that. I love that. One, and this is maybe a little, I think it's on the same topic, but I want to kind of segue it just a teeny tiny bit because one of the conversations I've had recently, and it's been brought up a lot, is this idea of bullying within an organization and people being mean to each other. And I had a conversation. There was a young man who was applying to be a part of our team, and he was in the first responder profession. He left the career early because of, you know, excessive hazing, bullying, kind of the culture within the organization. Being that you were instilled those qualities at a young age and not liking to see, people being bullied and, wanting things to be fair and people to feel safe. Do you feel like you've also applied that within the workplace of like, hey, when you're, within the walls of our organization, everyone here should also feel safe and we should also take care of each other and make sure that we're not, making things harder for each other?
Yeah, I mean, and the thing of it is with bullying, oftentimes, as I've seen it arise in our organization from the time I started as a patrol officer to walking through all the ranks that I have done, because I've stayed with the same organization my entire career, and literally started off as a patrol officer in a community in another state that I didn't even grow up in. I just made this my home. Um, Oftentimes it started off with comedy.
Mhm.
It's making fun, and it was kind of funny at the time, and it just continues to escalate and progress into something more where it's very clear. And sometimes I've talked to other individuals that have been involved in this, that we've had to discuss some of their actions and decision makings. That you got to read your room, know your audience, and yeah, we step in. Within our organization are very on top of that, not only just as an organization and from a policy standpoint from me as the chief, but our city also has a very strict policy on bullying. In fact, we try to go the extra length with it. We're kind of an anomaly, I guess, in some ways. We have a self-insured city policy. So we're through a self-insured insurance company, and they actually provide training on this. And bullying is mandatory training that the city actually has all staff work through. So we
Interesting.
have these discussions openly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's the first time I've heard that you guys have training on,
Mhm.
is it intrapersonal bullying? Would that be the right the
I'm gonna
right?
let it use that way, but yeah, it's
Yeah,
there's
within the organization. Yeah.
it is, and we have open discussions on it, and we have very high standards in our organization. We've drafted up some very solid policies that have been put to the test a couple of times, not only just through our own internal investigations, but also through some litigation at times where we've had grievances on some of the decisions in the past that we as an organization have made and had to explain, why our policy was effective or ineffective. And we'll have those open discussions. And coming on as we've continued to evolve, we encourage those discussions to come forward because it's the only way we're going to be able to improve.
Yeah.
Sometimes you say things and you don't mean to be disrespectful, but we talk about this philosophy a little bit. I mean, there's what your intent is, and then there's the perception.
Hmm.
And even though you intended to say the right thing or do the right thing, or you're just trying to be funny, and I use the word just because in your mind you thought it was, but if that person perceives it as disrespectful or an insult, or we encourage our employees to speak up with one another, and we encourage on the other side to be open to listening to that and respect that individual when they bring that up. So, yes, that's pushed very hard in our organization.
Yeah, it sounds like it takes a lot of communication and awareness. And I think that the more we can talk about, and I think that's a part of wellness, right? It's a part of culture. The more that you have a healthy culture and people don't feel like they're being, I'll put this in quotes, like attacked or made fun of or whatever that is, and they feel happier coming into the workplace, I think that all plays into wellness. So having that self-awareness, having the ability to give feedback and take feedback, I think we're a lot better at giving feedback than taking feedback a lot of times. It's hard for
Mhm.
us to feel like we're being criticized. So for you to have training of like, hey, you have to be able to explain, but also hear.
Yeah.
And that can be challenging. And it's a skill set I think that is very trainable. So I love that you guys are putting an emphasis on that. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and the thing of it is, I mean, and you got to take into account there's another layer too, as you're talking to law enforcement agencies, and no knock on the profession itself, but let's be honest, most people that work in law enforcement are type A personalities.
Mhm.
Generally don't like to be told they're doing something wrong, and
Sure.
that's a standard that we kind of impose on ourselves, and we need to open ourselves up and be a little more vulnerable to listen to what's going on around us, and go with what is appropriate for all of us to be comfortable. And like I said, I preach very heavy in our organization that we are a team. and a family. I use those words in conjunction with one another all the time in conversations that I have. I know this sounds like very much the football player from years ago in me, but team is always that acronym to me. That's together everyone accomplishes more, and we've got to take care of one another all the time.
Yeah, no, I agree. How did you develop this type of mindset? You and I talked offline a little bit, and you're like, when I started, back in the day, it was kind of rub dirt on it. And I'm sure that, when your parents were in law enforcement, it was similar, where wellness wasn't really a part of the conversation. So how or when or why did you develop this mindset of wellness and we have to take care of each other?
I mean, honestly, touching on some sensitive things, just from my personal life and experiences and things. The man that I set as a hero in my life also had his own demons at times, and alcohol became an issue for him. And I watched, a man that I admired start drinking a little too much. And I don't want to discredit him. He's a wonderful human being and deserves the highest levels of accolades, but it caught up to him. And what that now, seeing everything in hindsight, was him not having dealt with some of the trauma he had been exposed to back all the way back in the 70s and 80s, military and then also in law enforcement as well. There was domestic violence in my household. I witnessed some of that. Um, to the credit of both of my parents, as life passed, they passed on, and I got older and was able to kind of comprehend a little more of what was going on. They were very open with talking to me about it. My dad found a pathway to get himself away from that. My mom stayed, and they worked out the family connection. So I honestly want to say it started there, Paige. I mean, it really did. And then as it progressed into um, law enforcement, it really became a heavy focus for me to take care of those who are working within this organization. Because honestly, as much as I, as a chief, can go out in the community and talk about how healthy and great that we are, um, it speaks greater volumes when the officers go out and say, "Hey, man, this is a great place to work. This administration cares about you." As we were talking offline, and you kind of alluded to, I had a couple of incidences along the way where wellness did become a factor of consideration for me. Again, in my personal life, in 2018 in August, I had probably the most traumatic moment happen in my life I've ever experienced, and that was the stillbirth of my daughter. And at the time, I wasn't seeking help. I was just kind of looking inward. And as I was looking inward, it was more like I'm out protecting and working and serving a public that I don't even really know. And now I can't protect my own daughter.
Mm.
And I had this really hard conflict. Um, Fortunate, my wife and I are very Christian with our values, and we attend church on a regular basis. And I was able to lean into that side of my life. Along with, I had some other outlets I had established, and that would be working out. I love to lift weights and separate myself from law enforcement, um, and get myself back healthy in that capacity. So I was able to work through that, kind of fast forwarding through some of the details on that. But I did have an officer that was new to our agency, had went to a call for service where it was an unfortunate circumstance that a person who was a teenager actually had committed suicide by hanging. And that new officer, as they responded, entered the residence before paramedics, before I had gotten there. And at the time, I was a sergeant. And when I got there, seeing that the officer looked gray is wrong, but there was definitely that blank stare, like they were in shock to what they were seeing. And as we talked about this, I candidly will tell you, I made an error. I should have had that officer leave that call for service and taken it over and gotten another officer in there. And then on top of it, I should have went further beyond that and made contact with that individual within a short time after that, and probably had sent them home and let them decompress on what they were experiencing, and then connect them with the peer support program we had at the time, which was not very developed. It's just not there. It wasn't there as much as it is today. Um, and I saw, performance levels start to diminish. was a little more introverted with their, how they communicated with their coworkers. I did follow up with contacts, but unfortunately, due to another circumstances in their own personal life, between that incident and what happened in their personal life, they left the career entirely. And we ended up losing what, in my opinion, was going to be a phenomenal officer for our organization. So those kind of moments, those like little snapshots in my life were the reason that for our organization, I really focus very heavily on making sure we take care of our officers. That I apologize for our whole staff because we have civilian employees too,
Yeah.
uh, and make sure they're taken care of all of the time, not just some of the time.
Thank you. There's a lot to kind of unpack, and I want to go back to the beginning. So,
Sure.
obviously, we did not have the exact same experience, but I can relate a lot to what you said about, being in an environment where you obviously love your parents, right? And I came from an environment where, and I don't know if I shared this with you offline, but my parents were both drug addicts, and there was a lot of domestic violence in my upbringing as well. And I think being in that environment of like having so much love, and admiration for your parents because they're your parents. But for you, especially, it sounds like you had really great role models in your life that you looked up to. I think it gives you a, a different sense of empathy and understanding, and you can remove behavior from the person. And I think a lot of people, like my fiance, for example, I don't know if he has that. Like we have a lot of like, not arguments, but a lot of debates because he's very black and white. He's like, nope, like they're struggling, like that's their choice. And I have the ability to say, okay, but what got them there? And for you to say, there's a lot of undealt trauma that led, this person to these behaviors, but it doesn't make them a bad person necessarily, right? There are bad people out there, but in this case, for me, like I could look at my dad and I could see his heart. I could see who he was as a dad, even though he made terrible decisions and he wasn't doing the things that I wanted him to do or I needed him to do. And so I think it gives you a certain sense of empathy and emotional intelligence, and you look at the world a little bit differently when you come from an environment like that. But for you to say, I had this understanding, I had this experience, but then when I had my own tragedy, I didn't know how to deal with that myself, because I think that we do that, right? We look out in the world and we like try to help everybody else. And then when it comes to ourselves, we're like, what do we do? And I don't even know how, like the first step to like take care of me. And I appreciate you sharing some of the things that helped you to find that resilience and to keep moving through such an incredible tragedy, for you to say, hey, like, focusing on my physical fitness, focusing on my spiritual fitness or spiritual wellness, and leaning on my faith to be able to get through a situation that no one should ever have to go through, and be able to keep moving during a really hard time. So I appreciate you sharing that. And then also having the ability to self-assess and understand when we make mistakes and how we can improve moving forward. And you shared something really cool with me, and you don't have to like share the whole thing, but it was kind of a full circle moment. You said as a leader, you felt like, you made a mistake and you should have sent them home. You should have maybe given more support, and didn't. And then that was something that really kick-started what you guys are doing now in wellness. And so you used this as a way to learn and grow and improve so that you don't make those same mistakes again. So can you give us a little bit of insight into kind of what happened after that? So, you lost an officer that you said had great potential. You knew you made a mistake, and then you moved on from there. What did you do from there?
Yeah. So the discussions of that, and I always call them discussions of vulnerability, like bring up the vulnerable side and get it out there. And it's from friends of mine that are in the field that mainly cover the peer support program, taking care of one another more than I had actually done through the course of my career. So when fast forward after that, those discussions became more prevalent. We started looking into debriefings and diffusion trainings and getting chaplain services more involved and integrated into our organization. Not just chaplains for our agency alone, but chaplains for if we have an industrial accident where somebody's severely injured and officers are there, we would supply chaplains to even help out in under those circumstances and things too. But we continue to build a program in which we now have a supervisor in charge of our peer support program that now is a spokesperson at the table when we have our staff meetings,
Mm,
which was missing in our organizations for a lot of years. Um, Oftentimes it's interesting because they'll give you the pulse on whether your organization is healthy or not.
mm,
That individual, okay, obviously there's a high level of confidence that's involved in what they can discuss and can and can't discuss. But I mean, we do internal and external climate surveys all the time, and we fare very well in those. But when you talk about the internal pulse, that internal climate survey, you really can get it the most from your peer support supervisor. So what we do now is that our entire organization is allowed one officer wellness day, where their only part of their workday is to go to a 1 hour visit at a counseling center that's outside of our city to allow them an opportunity to decompress and talk to a counselor. That counseling or that counseling service is also within our health network. So if they choose to want to go back for more, they can set up more appointments. That's every year inlaid into our organization. We have peer support representatives on every one of our rotations of our shifts. And then we have the supervisor overseeing it, and then our chaplains are routinely have accessibility into our department, not to the entirety of the department, but parts of it where they can have contact with our officers. We've had a couple of significant incidences that have happened since I've been sworn in as chief over the last couple of years. One of them was an officer-involved death where one of our officers had to take the life of an individual who was barricaded in a home. And unfortunately for the family and for our officer, they were exposed to this circumstance and it ended up costing one individual their life. Obviously, the officer gets put on leave because we do an internal investigation on that, and there will be a criminal investigation that goes along with it, done by an outside agency. We offered to that officer wellness visits at the counseling center as well. That was paid for by us. Our insurance company also offers emergency wellness visits as well. That's covered by them at the same time too. So long and short of that is they get up to like 8 visits at no expense to them other than the time going there. In that particular incident, we had 5 other officers that were involved with the extraction of those who were barricaded in the house with this individual
mm,
that lost their life. And those extracted officers that were exposed to this and that level of trauma, we did it for the first time in our organization where we gave them 3 administrative leave days, non-disciplinary is what we call them. They were non-disciplinary administrative leave days. And what those days was to allow them 3 full sleep cycles to decompress from their exposure to this incident. And we paid for them to go to the counseling center for a visit with a counselor for a 1 hour session. And at first we just offered it, but we gave the 3 days, but we offered the counseling session. All 5 of those officers went to those counseling sessions, and some of them were impacted by it so much and so appreciative they felt comfortable enough to come forward to in an open discussion say, hey, we're going back for more counseling sessions.
um, So when you have, and this is interesting because I've had conversations with people who said that they were involved in an internal investigation of some sort and they felt like they just got plopped into a cubicle or, sent home and they didn't know what was going on and they didn't feel like they had any support at all. So for you to say, hey, we also make sure that during these times they're getting the resources and the help that they need so
Mhm.
that, if and when everything's good, they can come back and they can come back well. And I don't know if I've ever heard anyone say that before on this podcast, at least.
Yeah, no, it's a heavy focus for us, and we found an incredible return on that investment, so to say. I don't want to put dollars and cents to
Sure.
people's well-being, but I mean, but when you really look at it from an organizational standpoint, it really kind of drives home that we are a team, we are a family, we're trying to take care of one another, in the good and the bad. I mean, we're going to make mistakes, and we need to accept that as well. But in these circumstances, we had done this because we knew it was the right thing to do. I have in our organizational structure, there's a chief and then two deputy chiefs underneath that work for me, and I do a more of a I like to say I'm a transformational leader, but that's like nearly impossible to ever attain. So that's like the holy grail of leadership, right? But I mean, definitely a democratic leadership style in that capacity under these circumstances. And the other two, or the two deputy chiefs that I work with, were 100% in support of this. And that message went through our organization in such a way that our officers were actually telling some of their family and friends that work in other surrounding jurisdictions, and they just were in disbelief that an administration would say, "Hey, listen, you know what? Here's your 3 free days off to decompress from this trauma, and we're going to pay for it, you know, a 1 hour visit for you. And oh, by the way, too, our insurance company that covers the whole city, not just your health insurance. I'm talking about the insurance company. They also will pay for additional visits that are of no cost other than your time to make it to the counseling center."
Yeah.
Um, it spread really quick. I had other administrators from other agencies that were calling up to ask how we figured out a way to do this. But again, credit to the sergeant that was put in charge of our peer support program. He worked diligently on setting this up. We set a standard, and now it's a past practice. So we're going to continue to use it.
Well, I'm sure that your retention is really high and you have a line out the door for people to come work for you too. Because if people are talking about that, they're your
Yeah.
best recruiters. So that was going to be my question though. And I think we can look at ROI a few different ways, but of course, when we typically hear ROI, it talks about money, and
Yep.
return on your dollars. How did you as a leader have the confidence to invest in a program or resources when you didn't really know what that ROI was going to be? How did you have the confidence to put it in motion in the first place? And then my second question, I can repeat this if you forget, but my second question is, how did you get your leadership team to share that same vision and message with you? Because I know a lot of leaders struggle with that too. It's kind of twofold. It's like, okay, well, how do we know that our dollars are going somewhere, worthwhile, and that it's going to be an ROI and it's going to help and it's going to get utilized? Like, how do we know?
Mhm.
But then also, how do we make sure that when we do these things, that the message is consistent and you don't have some leaders who are like completely shut off and some people who are on board?
Very good questions. So when you talk about return on investment for this, I do kind of put it in a dollar sense in an explanation and kind of makes sense. So in my budget, 92% of the budget that I operate under are all of my human resources that are working in this organization. Why wouldn't I focus on that? Is the question. Is the way that, or it, which it just makes sense. That's what you should focus on. The courage to do it or the willingness to do it. I just knew it was the right thing, and that's really what it came down to. So if 92% of my organization is wages and salary, wages and benefits, why wouldn't I want to try to take care of them? Because here's the thing of it is and I don't know this is true exact dollars and cents, but I'll bet you I'm pretty close in it. If you take an officer that you lose that from your organization that's been with you for 4 to 5 years, you're roughly losing about $4 to $5 million based on training, equipment, their experience, the investigatory, train. I already mentioned training. I guess I'm repeating myself, but you start breaking it down. Also, then on top of it, the wages and salaries you were already paying them in that time frame, you're at about $4 to $5 million. So one of the visits I'll happily tell you is barely over $100 for the counseling center for a 1 hour visit that we worked out contractually to with this counseling center we're working with. A little over $100. I can retain an officer for several years to come. I don't invest in that, I lose 4 to 5 million within 4 to 5 years. It just makes sense. And as far as to the second part, and forgive me if I go off astray. Please guide me back if I'm off on what your question was. But to get those to buy in for it, it was already starting to be established earlier. It was one of the things when I was not the chief, but as a deputy chief and even as a lieutenant, I'd already started discussing we need to bolster our peer support program because 2020 taught us a lesson that, hey, listen, there's a lot of things that are going on, and really quickly society can turn on law enforcement, which created a high level of stress. So retention of officers was a concern even before that, to be perfectly honest with you, before Floyd and everything. And you're talking about the Ferguson incident and stuff. It goes all the way back even before that, where systematically those interested in wanting to get into the field were starting to become concerned, and there was less people getting into it. There's a lot more stress and more responsibility and public outcry and ridicule. Um, those are the things internally we got to make sure we can pad our officers to be able to cope with. And it just makes sense to start talking about these things and how we can improve it. So before I even got to the chief's position, I was talking to my predecessor, who was a phenomenal chief, by the way. And I still talk to him for advice nowadays too. And we started to build it up so that people were okay or not looked down upon if they were vulnerable, if they said, "Hey, this bothered me." Um, I know we talked offline. I don't think I've brought it up in our conversation here yet, but I started off in a department that basically said, "Rub dirt on it, get back out there, deal."
Yeah.
Uh, Now we have officers that we had a stabbing incident here just a few years back, and one of our supervisors went over and talked to one of our officers and asked him if he was okay. And at the time, the officer said, "Yeah, I'm okay." He goes, "Well, if you're not okay, just let me know. Because you can just go home for the rest of the night and let this go." And the officer, being the guy that I know that he is, says, "Hey, you know what? I'm going to stay, and I'll stay. I'm good. Everybody else is working. I'm going to work too." And about an hour later, he sends a message back to our supervisor, says, "Hey, listen, actually, I'm not okay right now. It's just, you know, what should I do?" And our supervisor doesn't have to consult with the deputy chief, doesn't have to talk to the lieutenant. Turns around to the officer, said, "Hey, you know what? Go home for the rest of the night. We'll talk to you tomorrow. If you're not okay, we'll square away what we need to do from there."
Yeah.
That's what I want our supervisors to do. That's what our peer support supervisor that is at the table at all of our staff meetings is telling all the other supervisors. And I'm supporting those comments and that direction and guidance that's being provided by the people that actually go through the training and know what they're saying.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. And I love how you compared, like, hey, when I started, it was like this, and now it's like this. And I think that's a testament to boots on the ground effort, having awareness, having conversations, and creating a space where people feel comfortable. And I love that you keep saying the word vulnerable, because I still think that there are certain words that have a stigma attached to them. And for you to say, vulnerability is not weakness, it's strength. And we actually encourage this. And anytime someone comes forward and says, "Hey, I'm not okay," we make sure that everyone is supportive of that and that there are resources on the back end if and when they need it. So I love that you're changing the conversation and the way that we view vulnerability, because I agree. I think that vulnerability is such a huge strength. I think it connects us as humans, and we understand that we all go through stuff. And especially you guys, seeing some of the hardest things that you can see in someone's career, for you to understand that and say, "Hey, there's going to be times, because we're human, that we're going to need things, and we want you to feel safe to come forward if that happens." So thank you for all the work that you guys are doing. My last question for you is words of wisdom. So, for either the younger generation who are coming into the career today, or maybe someone who's aspiring to be in leadership, what words of wisdom would you share with them that maybe you wish you would have known when you were younger?
I knew this question was coming, so I kind of prepared a little bit so I don't over talk on it because there's so much there that runs through my mind on it. So, um, first and foremost, in law enforcement, I found this out really early in my career, and it wasn't one of the things I attributed to my dad, but now years later, I can look back. Remember, I told you he was a mountain of a man, and people respected him after they talked to him, but they were afraid when they saw him. So, in this line of work, your reputation precedes you before you even arrive on a call for service. It truly is, because people already have an opinion about who you are. And we oftentimes need to work on or I should say, continue to work on and improve how we treat and react and respond to people under crisis and the circumstances that they're experiencing. Granted, we go to a lot of calls and it can be frustrated, and you have a tendency of building that up inside of you. Um, and the next person that is having a crisis or a situation that needs law enforcement attention, how you act, what you say, what you do, they will remember beyond your appearance. So you're already you're already being judged before you walk in the door, and they're going to remember you for life afterwards because that experience has come up. I mean, we're a big small community, so I've actually run into people that I've talked to years ago, and I've had the negative comments like, some people didn't enjoy my presence or my what I had to say at the time or how I explained things. And I always think that you learn more from errors or failures than you do from success, because I can tell you every mess up that I've done in my entire career. I could maybe tell you a handful of good things or like really solid positive things I've done, because I don't really think about those as much. I always think about the things I've made errors on because I always want to improve that. That quest always improves. So always try to improve. Understand that people are going to prejudge you before you show up, and be prepared to be able to explain yourself, explain everything in detail on a level of respect. I think it'll go a long ways because later on you'll encounter those individuals again, and it'll pay forward for sure. Stand on strong moral and ethical character and standings, which is kind of a common sense part of it. And then integrity, it's doing the right thing all of the time, not subjectively some of the time. You oftentimes lose respect from people when you show one side of yourself and then you walk over into another room and you act completely different. So stand for what you believe in. Make sure you represent yourself for what you value and what you're worth. And I think, and the last but not least, like trust and respect, those are things that are earned. They're not given. So when you have contact with those in the community or your peers, just understand and know if you treat them with respect, you'll probably get respect back. I mean, I know there's clashes of personalities and stuff like that, but you got to work through those moments and just to see people for where they stand and appreciate them. And even though I said last but not least, I actually lied. The very last but not least is mental health is not an option. You have to work on it. You brought it up a little bit earlier, Paige, and we didn't really touch on it too much, but emotional intelligence, critically important. I learned that when I went to the FBI Academy. I took a course on emotional intelligence. And I'll be honest, I was skeptical that I even put in for it as a graduate level course. And here I'm taking it on emotional intelligence. I'm not sure what I'm getting into, but hey, I preach to my officers, be vulnerable, do things that don't look really fancy and fun to you, because you might find out they really actually are fancy and fun once you get into it. It might have been my favorite class when I was out there. And some of the exercises that I learned in that emotional intelligence course that I took, I still do today. And honestly, I mean, I'll let my agency speak for itself as to whether I'm a better officer. But I will tell you this much. I know I'm a better husband and dad to my kids, and a better husband to my wife, obviously.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on here. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I appreciate you being willing to be vulnerable and talk about the things that you're doing organizationally. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Paige. It's great.
Of course.